So you support the budget presented that cuts $500 million, but you also support us adding $1 billion should we choose to do that?
Well, I can't not support the budget as proposed because then I would be supporting no budget.
Director Patel, you're familiar with the Fifth Amendment.
Yes, Senator.
Located on the congressional.gov website. Funny enough, with all the other stuff going on, Kash Patel, he's probably the one I've heard from the least.
Senator Merkley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Director Patel. And so as I understood it, you testified yesterday that you'd like to have another $1 billion added on to the FY25 level to do the additional work you'd like to do on drug interdiction, fentanyl in general, and anti-terrorism. And today you gave us a budget that requests cutting $500 million. Which is it? Do you want us to, what are you asking of this committee? To add funds, add $1 billion, or to cut $500 million?
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate the opportunity. What I'm asking for is that with more, I can simply do more. And I was giving examples of what more I could do. I can do the mission and am in support of the budget here. And I'm working with appropriators and you to fill the gaps.
So you support the budget presented that cuts $500 million, but you also support us adding $1 billion should we choose to do that?
Well, I can't not support the budget as proposed because then I would be supporting no budget.
Okay. Well, we've got those two options. We do look forward to further details from you about how you plan to modify the function of FBI on these different missions that you've highlighted today so that we can give it the appropriate consideration. Mm-hmm. Director Patel, you're familiar with the Fifth Amendment.
Yes, Senator.
Located on the congressional.gov website. Fifth Amendment, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Now let's continue.
Really the Freedom Clause. Mm-hmm. Director Patel, you're familiar with the Fifth Amendment.
Yes, Senator.
And it is really the Freedom Clause of the United States. It was 4 years into being a nation when Congress and the states said, hey, we have to make sure that there's not an over-aggressive government in the future that deprives us of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And you're familiar that that applies to all persons in the United States.
Yes, Senator.
So there's been a lot of concern about the several hundred immigrants who were swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador.
We're doing this, okay.
Without due process.
Okay.
And does that concern you?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process or are supposed to be afforded due process. All the FBI did and all the FBI will continue to do is arrest those that have violated the law.
Okay, but to arrest, you have to investigate. Have you launched an investigation of this violation of the Freedom Clause of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, I don't know that I agree with your characterization.
Well, that was my first question, whether or not you agree with the Fifth Amendment and are prepared to defend it. It is your job to investigate crimes.
Yes, I agree with the Fifth Amendment. I agree with the entire Constitution, and the men and women at the FBI decide.
So are you going to launch an investigation of the reported violation of the due process of several hundred individuals?
Again, Senator, it's not for me to call the balls and strikes on it. The men and women at the FBI who are trained to open investigations will make those calls.
So you have no influence over whether an investigation is opened?
I have influence over it, but you're asking me a constitutional question. I'm not a constitutional scholar.
Well, it's actually not it's a question also of law.
But your position is that every one of those individuals is by constitutional right afforded due process. I don't know the answer to that. I'm telling you.
You haven't read the Constitution?
I've
It
got
says
it,
all persons.
I've got it right here, but what you're saying is that every
Really has
single
it right
one of
there.
the illegals that was sent down to El Salvador is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. It
It
says no
doesn't
person.
say that.
It does say no person. Yeah, I'll encourage you to read it because it's
I
also
read it
been
every day.
affirmed by the Supreme Court.
Okay, so in all fairness now, this is actually where this gets scary because the argument that most people make anyways when it comes down to due process is if you're not going to afford anyone due process, how do you know whether or not you're picking up a citizen or not? Due process goes way beyond just making sure that everyone gets a fair chance. It's also making sure that you got the facts straight. That's what's concerning here. The last thing that you want to be able to do is to live in a world where officers of the law could just pick you up off the street and then ship you off to someplace that you've never been to when you know in your heart of hearts you're not supposed to be there. Let's say there's 1,000 people and 999 of them are criminals.
What?
And one person out of them is innocent. The way you figure that out is through the process of due process.
Now he's a philosophizer.
Due process is just getting the facts straight. How do you launch investigations and then make a conclusion? Because the conclusion is the arrest and then shipping off to El Salvador. You're saying that we got the whole process right. That's the conclusion.
Is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. It
It
says no
doesn't
person.
say that.
It does say no person. Yeah, I'll encourage you to read it
I
because it's
read
also
it
been
every day.
affirmed by the Supreme Court
Life, liberty, property.
repeatedly. On the case of Miranda versus Arizona, held the right of all individuals, regardless of citizenship status.
Okay, so Miranda versus Arizona. Facts of the case. This case represents the consolidation of 4 cases in each of which the defendant confessed guilt after being subjected to a variety of interrogation techniques without being informed of his Fifth Amendment rights during an interrogation. On March 13th, 1963, Ernesto Miranda was arrested in his house and brought to the police station where he was questioned by police officers in connection with the kidnapping and after 2 hours of interrogation, the police obtained a written confession from Miranda. The written confession was admitted into evidence at trial despite the objection of the defense attorney and the fact that the police officers admitted that they had advised Miranda of his right to have an attorney present during the interrogation. The jury found Miranda guilty. On appeal, the Supreme Court of Arizona affirmed and held that Miranda's constitutional rights were not violated because he did not specifically request counsel. So in this case, I can kind of see where these two might be talking past each other, but it doesn't take away from the whole due process argument. It does deal with the Fifth Amendment, but it deals with it more in the sense of self-incrimination. But I'm going to guess that he's going to utilize that to then springboard the point about due process.
All right, Ms. DeBoer, I'm going to read to you your Miranda rights, okay? Mm-hmm. All right, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to talk to a lawyer and have him present with you while you're being questioned. If you cannot afford to hire a lawyer, one will be appointed to represent you before any questioning if you wish. You can decide at any time to exercise these rights and not answer any questions or make any statements. Do you understand each of these rights I have explained to you?
Yes.
Having these rights in mind, do you wish to talk to me now?
I'll encourage you to read it
I
because it's also
read it
been
every day.
affirmed by the Supreme Court repeatedly. On the case of Miranda versus Arizona, held the right of all individuals, regardless of citizenship status, the Supreme Court in Reno versus Flores. I mean, but it's the plain language of the Constitution. It concerns me that you're not familiar with the core concept of due process applying to all persons as written in black and white in the Constitution.
As the first public defender who's ever served at the FBI as its director, I am more aware of due process than any predecessor in my seat. You are delineating between removal proceedings and criminal acts. My job is to investigate criminal acts. That's what we do.
You are aware that the Fifth Amendment refers to taking away liberty, and when people are arrested on the street, detained and sent out of the country, that their liberty has been taken away.
Senator, that is a constitutional question that you are asking me to answer. It's not for me to answer.
The question has already been answered by the Supreme Court that they're protected. Therefore, it's a violation of law, and it's your responsibility to open an investigation.
Good
You're
point.
saying today you will not do so?
Good point.
I am not the agency involved in removal proceedings. That is a different branch of government.
So if an agency other than the FBI violates the law and the Constitution, you will not investigate because it's a different agency?
I will investigate every violation of law.
Well, you have, but you just said you're not investigating.
No, you and I are in disagreement on what is a violation of law. I have yet to hear from the Supreme Court your position as you have adjudicated it.
Well, very, very interesting, because the Supreme Court's been very clear, and I had heard you were trained in the law, so I expected maybe you would try to uphold it. You also took an oath to the Constitution.
Thank you for the reminder.
Well, it's important to remind you, since you're apparently unfamiliar with the very basics of the core protection of freedom in our Constitution.
What I am familiar with is protecting the American public, and that's what
Let me
I'm
close
doing.
with one question, Mr. Chairman. Will you make sure that due process in every action of the FBI is completely honored under your time as director?
Well, he's not the one to ask. This guy is the one to ask. But no, you're not going to get that answer out of him in the way that you want it anyway, because he was actually put there for the sake of being loyal to this guy. That is all. They know what the Constitution already says about due process. That's fairly obvious. Are they going to live up to it? No, because then that would be admitting some kind of wrong.
Will I ensure that due process is followed?
Yes.
Under the Constitution?
Completely.
What do you
by
think
all-
he's gonna say?
Send that message throughout the FBI that due process must be followed, is constitutionally required. Make sure that it's done under your direction.
I like Trump's version. At least it's honest, because he just said, listen, we're not about to investigate 30,000, a million people. You know how long that would take? In other words, we have a job to get done. We're just going to do it and let the chips fall where they may.
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Cash.
Senator Murkowski.
All right, just wanted to go over that one quickly with y'all. So whatever your thoughts are, leave them in the comment section. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like, and I will see you again on the next one. Be easy, y'all.